Welcome everyone. So, back again with another uncapped demon form variant build. Basically, this is a armor stacking variant. After a couple of days of experimenting and failing with some other build ideas around thorns, had some success around the self-proliferation build, which has gained some popularity in recent days. But there was nothing really that I felt really stood out or felt good enough to present to you all. But it wasn't a complete waste. Some of the pieces that I crafted for those other experiments I have used in this build, and it really was geared primarily towards what you're seeing right now in the demo, and that is running overrun, abyssal pit overrun maps. I was playing around with the Rogue Exile farming strategy, although now that's just gotten a little bit too expensive to justify, but the abyssal pits are still good value to run, and honestly just a lot of fun. Just always high density, a lot of currency drops, increased chances of getting things like Omens of Light. If you still run chance for Rogue Exiles on your Atlas tree and potentially on one or two of your tablets, they pop up and have a chance for a Heart of the Well as well, which still goes for a couple of div at least, even though they're dropping in price with more people farming them. But going back to the original concept, as I said, running this higher density content, and with a lot of these abyssal monsters on these maps which run the Shadewalker modifier, which I'm sure all of you demon form enjoyers are well aware of this modifier and have your frustrations with it. They teleport onto you and they completely reduce your life recovery, which affects us obviously quite dramatically, whether you're running the recoup or the Tech Rod's life regen setups. It just completely cuts your regen and is very dangerous. In the case of recoup, it'll typically almost one-shot you because of the amount of self-damage you're doing to yourself. With Tech Rods, it's not as bad, but it's still quite scary. You'll typically stop casting, your health will get to near zero, and you'll fall out of demon form. It's just a very unpleasant modifier. So, having a lot more risks in these maps, and with the typical previous setups, especially with Veil of the Night, if you're running a life stacking, one of the life stacking variants, with no elemental resistances, there's a higher potential of getting one shot, and these maps are typically a much higher investment to run. They vary from 1 to 2 divs per map just to enter and to buy the waystones. So dying is not desirable, and I just wanted a setup which was a little bit tankier and a little bit less risky. So I took some of the armor pieces which I had been crafting from, like I said, some experimental builds, and I tried to apply it to the uncapped demon form build and have had some reasonable success. So I just wanted to share that with you all. So what does that look like? Running the life stacking setup and Tech Rods, your helmet, chest, and focus is essentially locked in with your Rathpith, your Combs Heart, and your Veil of the Night. One thing immediately, which you'll notice, they're not high values, but Combs Heart and Veil of the Night has a little bit of armor on it. Combs is just armor, not a high roll, but it's always something. And we still have our gloves and our boot slots free. And although we can't really stack a tremendous amount of armor to the point of being practically near immortal, we can stack enough to make a difference and to at least cut down the risks of getting one shot. And it's primarily also to do with our ascendancy passive, which is Altered Flesh. which I'll dive into in more detail once I get to the passive tree. But what I've done is I've swapped out the gloves and boots, which previously were running ES, Energy Shield, and swapped them for relatively high rolls and for armor. Now, these are obviously relatively expensive pieces as they are with the 3 sockets, but ignore the sockets. The sockets just add a little bit of, I guess, flexibility and added value, but ultimately you're just primarily looking for 3 things, which is high armor roll, number 1. Secondly, a high armor applies elemental damage. This is probably a better example of a tier 1 roll. And then thirdly, either chaos resistance or increased item rarity. This is really tailored around farming currency. And it's also what really works well with using Valve the Knight with no elemental resistances, is that you can focus your other pieces on just getting a high rarity rolls as well. So you can see here, chaos resistance, rarity, armor applies to elemental damage, armor applies to elemental damage, increased sockets, chaos resistance. These are very tailored towards movement speed as well. And the reason there is such a high importance on the armor applies elemental damage is that is essentially where we're getting our elemental mitigation from, due to our lack of elemental resistances. So as I mentioned, they're not high values. 35,000 for fire, in my case, 21,000 for cold and lightning. Do not get misled by the high percentage estimates here that they provide. Anyone that's been playing the game for a while, hopefully you've heard some of the community discussion around how the way armor works, to not going into too much detail, but the higher the hit that you receive, the more armor you need. And it's almost to an exponential amount. So armor is very effective against smaller hits, but to mitigate larger hits, you need a substantial amount more, and that isn't really reflected in these percentages. So they can be relatively misleading. But this is what ties also into our ascendancy, is that we actually reduce quite a bit of what the maximum amount of damage we can receive in 3 different damage sources. Physical damage being quite significant, we reduce 20%. So that top end singular hit of damage that we can take is reduced by 20%. And likewise for our cold and lightning, moving that towards fire has the same effect of reducing the maximum amount. So we actually need, this may go over a few people's heads who don't know how armor works too well, but it helps improve the effect of the amount of armor we have, and we don't need to get as much to get the same benefit as someone who didn't run Altered Flesh and didn't have the 20% reduction at the top end of the damage. So the physical mitigation that we get from our armor having only 16,000 isn't probably a lot, but it still helps a little bit, even if it does reduce a big slam by, say, throwing numbers out here, don't quote me on this, but like 10, 20%. Running this much life and effective HP, we're also running Mind Over Matter, which I'll get to once we get into the passive tree. What's that? Almost 7,000 there, plus another 8,500 effective HP. So even if that amount of armor, talking just about the physical, because this is our lowest roll here out of the 4, even if that reduces the maximum hit we can take by at least 10, 20%, it can be the difference between getting one shot or not. And I've definitely noticed the difference running those high density Overrun by Abyss maps. Our highest roll is actually fire, which is important because that is also twofold. Again, with the synergy of Altered Flesh, our Cold and Lightning gets moved towards Fire, so the top end damage from the Cold and Lightning gets reduced, but it gets transferred to the Fire. So having a larger amount of fire mitigation is very helpful. And secondly, more often than not, the things that will one-shot you in maps will be the fire explosions. At least from what I've noticed, all the big one-shot boss abilities that will kill you the most easily tend to be fire as well. So there's that dual effect. And it's also the easiest to stack actually, because we're running the armor gloves, especially if you've got a couple of sockets. If you've got two, I'd probably not do the chaos resistance and just focus on 2 extra socketables, which are the soul cores of dampening, and that bumps up the impact of the armor towards the fire damage, which is why you can see the higher value here. And we also get a little bit more from the passive tree moving on to this node. Again, I'll get to the passive tree in a moment. So we get more physical damage reduction, we get more elemental damage reduction, and in general the build just feels a lot tankier. The reason, like I said, mentioned at the beginning as well, it also in many ways synergizes a little bit better with the gear setup this build runs to begin with, having an actual armor based chest piece and a hybrid armor based helmet. The amount of energy shield you'd get from these two pieces wasn't typically very significant in either respect to really warrant a massive amount of energy shield stacking and investment in your passive tree. So I'm finding that the armor swap works quite well. What is the trade-off? The trade-off is, especially once we get to the passive tree, we do lose quite a bit of the movement speed options that we had previously. So if, for those that have followed my previous builds, the uncapped demon form setup that I run with tech rods, there was a variant which I pushed towards where I actually got upwards of 150 to 250 movement speed. It was just ridiculous. But like I said, it was a little bit more susceptible to getting one shot. This build runs at 75 base. Then if you've got things like Rite of Passage, there's also, where do I have it? The Fall of the Axe with Onslaught, if you run chilled maps and things like that, where you can get a bit more movement speed. But with Rite of the Passage getting an extra 15% movement speed, I'm typically running it around 90%, 100. It's a little bit slower, but that is the trade-off. You know, it's not all wins. The other small change, which I've experimented with and seems to work relatively well with the uncapped demon form in general, but especially with this setup, running Veil of the Night, not netting as many elemental resistances, is using a Coward's Embrace and actually getting a few low life nodes. And the main one primarily being Final Barrage for 20% extra cast speed. And ultimately, I kind of first took it because I've been a little bit broke recently, experimenting and just wasting a lot of currency on random items, but also to be able to use the Techrod's Gaze on the boots. So this is a much, much cheaper option than the Farrell's Rune of the Chase, and actually a double the value when you're running on low life. So a big movement speed boost. Like I said, this build suffers from having a little bit of lack of movement speed. So getting that extra boost, you know, unfortunately we can only run one of these as it says at the top, limited to one, but it's always an extra bonus. So a lot more cast speed and a bit of extra movement speed from the low life. If you really wanted to, you could also, well, I actually did stick with it. Pain Attunement as well, so 30% extra crit damage bonus. There's not a lot of crit damage bonus in this build. I think I've got just Barbaric Strength Anointed, but it's always a small damage boost as well, just for 1 point where we're traveling through here anyway. So that's it in terms of the gear. All the rest of the pieces, for those that are new, high level of cold spell skills, crit hit chance, cast speed, very important on the wand, dueling wand, If you can get a level 20 spell slinger bonus, but it is a lot more expensive, that just gets you the one extra socket on spell slinger. We've covered those three pieces. Comb's pretty self-explanatory. Stacking life with tech rods gives you a tremendous amount of damage and life regen. Rathbit synergizes with the extra damage as well on all fronts. Amulet, level of all spells, cast speed, and max life percentage, the four most important things. And the ring, I'm just pretty much using to stack rarity, life, and cast speed, and then mirroring it with a Calandra's. So, passive tree, quite a substantial change you can see compared to previous setups that you may have seen me run. So again, a lot of traversing before. For those that remember, we used to track up here, get this cluster around these two clusters here, and then we'd track all the way down here, effectively navigating towards all of the movement speed clusters around here, up here, this one, and then sometimes would go as far as here, or we'd get a what's it called, from nothing duel with our pack to get this cluster here. Now we're going the complete opposite direction because we're navigating towards the armor portion of the passive tree. So we navigate up through here. I take a detour through to Spiral into Mania because it's very high value, where we want to cap our chaos resistance and 10% cast speed. There's just a tremendous value from this node. You could also potentially use this as an anoint option, depending on what you get on your Megalomaniac, or get it on your Megalomaniac duel. And all the cast speed navigating towards that as well is helpful. This cluster remains the same. This is almost a staple of any Tech Rods build. Something new that I haven't done in previous variants is I've taken Mind over Matter. This is just a completely free extra source of damage shield, just buffer. It's 800 effective HP. We don't really have any recoup, but we just use a big old flask and spam our flask, which gets some extra, recovery from the Cow's Legacy as well. You could potentially even get an instant recovery one if you really wanted to, but it's just an extra bit of HP effectively, and it's actually quite easy to see when you're taking damage as well, because the first thing you'll see is your energy shield and then your mana drop before your health gets effective. So it's a bit of an extra shield from your health, which is jumping up and down a little bit due to the life cost of your skills. So that's something new. Standard, getting the Overzealous predominantly is the important one. We want to have our mana cost as high as possible with Adaloi's Bloodletting. As I said, picked up Pain Enchantment because we're testing out and working with low life. Zealot's Oath to get our overflow into the energy shield, to recover our energy shield every time it gets damaged. I've got this on my Megalomaniac duel, but if you don't, you navigate through three of these points and pick this up. So this is just the start of the armor stacking. Good value cluster. We want to get our extra armor towards fire damage, and again armor towards elemental damage, which you're also trying to get on the gloves and the boots. So this is important. We get these clusters here, more armor effectively, bit of recoup towards life, some high value strength nodes here, which is effectively life towards our life stacking, and then a lot of armor nodes here, and another high value armor node with both armor percentage and armor towards elemental damage. Same with all the pathing nodes. Then another popular combination which gives you a lot of value is leather-bound gauntlets with iron reflexes, so you get evasion for every armor value on your gloves, and then you convert that back to armor, so it is essentially doubling your armor value on your gloves. So that's why I may have touched upon it at the start. Getting a high value armor roll, especially on your gloves, is important because this combination just doubles it. Gem Enthusiast, which I believe was typically what we anointed in previous variants. Now we actually path to it because we're in the area. Tech Rods, we placed it up here and then converted what was I don't even know what this, I think that's Val Pack typically. That's where we get our Sacrifice Blood now to get our regen. We pick up all of these movement speed nodes, the little movement speed that we have access to. We try and get maximum value out of it. Momentum especially is the most important one. There's like about 10 movement speed just from this by itself because of the hidden movement speed penalty on armors, and we're using a strength-based armor which has the highest penalty. And then we navigate towards this cluster as well, which is our reduced penalty from using skills. So that is the passive tree. Still running the uncapped demon form and using baited sand city. Our only source of energy shield is this conversion. It's also the one conversion we need to, in combination with Coward's Legacy, to get onto low life. Energy shield because Spirit has no effect due to Comb's Heart, reducing our spirit to 0. Mana could be another option in that, again, using Mind over Matter, it provides effective HP. But as I mentioned before, we don't really have any mana recovery per se, whereas with Zealot's Oath, and we have a lot of regen from Tech Rods, the overflow and recharge of the energy shield is much more effective, and it helps. Again, you lose a little bit of effective HP compared to just not having any conversion and having a big life stack. I've got, I think, over almost 7,500. So you lose, I think, about 800 or so life as a result of effective HP. But one of the main things that will kill you is Shadewalker and the reduced life recovery impact it causes on you the moment you run into those rare mobs. And having that extra barrier before your HP shield is what will typically save you. That lump of mana and that energy shield is all that will be defending you if you see your life almost zero out when you run into one of those mobs. So it helps. That is all in terms of the changes to the gear and the passive tree. So quite substantial compared to some of the other tweaks that I've shown along the journey. Don't necessarily recommend this to anyone per se, unless you're really at the top end and just want something different to try. Like I said, it really is tailored towards running higher risk, overrun by abyss type maps where there's a lot more risks. If you're just blasting through regular maps, running rare mobs, you're probably better geared, honestly, towards the higher movement speed variant, and just accepting the fact that maybe 1 in 10 maps you might get the odd one shot, and oh well, it's not as much of a currency investment running those maps typically. But when you're paying 1 or 2 divs just to get overrun by abyss map, you don't really want to get those one shots happening, and you want to maximize your value from running those maps. So I'm finding this armor variant is a bit nicer in that respect. One small other thing that I'll quickly touch on that I also changed, I used to run Frostbolt within my Spellslinger as well. Frost darts, I've just convinced myself, if you're not running Snake Bit Ring to cause the frost bolts not to pierce and just explode on impact, the fact that they pass through targets, you know, I've got my build to such a point where that still does a tremendous amount of damage and honestly just kills things by itself. But Frost Darts, with Frost Bolts chilling everything and Frost Darts having its explosions always triggered as a result of that in running that combination, just provides a lot more single target damage. So especially now with every single map having a boss at the end, with a lot actually having powerful bosses, you do need a lot more single target damage with the latest patch, and swapping in Frost Darts just helps a lot with that. Also, Frost Darts has a lot more projectile speed, so without being able to run Valentis propulsion in 2 places, the Frost Darts just combos a lot better. Everything just flies around much quicker. So it's been a very positive change. Small other defensive layer which I added typically for movement speed and just for blasting and running fast through maps, Fall of the Axe is really great. But I've swapped it out for a Forsaken Bangle, just again to prevent spikes in damage. This provides great defensive layers against chaos damage, of which there's quite a lot. It provides a 50% recoup on that damage that you take, which is noticeable and helps a lot. And that's it. Quite a substantial change. I just wanted to share it because I feel that it is a variant that is firstly quite interesting. It's like, as I said, and you can probably tell, it's quite dramatically different to any of the other small tweaks that I've done in the step-by-step videos that I've been sharing. But secondly, it's been quite effective, and it provides a different option for people who have potentially been frustrated by one-shots. I know there's been quite a few comments on previous videos, or, you know, occasionally get one shot. Well, what do you do when you run into the Shadewalker rare mobs? And this provides an option that is a little bit more defensive, as I said, at the cost of movement speed. Lastly, what I'll quickly mention, in case people get a little bit freaked out by the difficulty in maybe getting pieces such as this with the 3 sockets, especially the boots with the increased effective socket items as well. Obviously, the Tekrod setup is somewhat expensive in and of itself, but that's just the price you pay. These are just unique pieces which you just need, and that's it. But for the boots and gloves, you can do much more cost-effective variants with just 2 sockets for say. As you can see on the gloves, I haven't actually done the increased effect of socketed items, which reduces the cost of crafting these quite substantially. I think these only cost me, don't quote me on this precisely, but I think it was in the range of 3 to 4 divs per try. And I think I got the 3 sockets on my 2nd or 3rd try. So not the most expensive item to craft. Boots are a lot more expensive to craft, and a lot of risks, especially if you're corrupting them and trying to get the 3rd socket. So not something I'd recommend to most people, but 2 sockets would be enough. Or even just if you're not fussed about movement speed and you just want to overrun by abyss maps and take them a little bit slower, then just even a 1 socket pair of boots will take you a long way. But again, just high armor value. Armor applies to elemental damage, 2 main things, and obviously at least a 30% base movement speed. That's all. Thank you all, as always, for the support, the comments. Always try and help out where I can. One maybe a little last thing that I'll just add if anyone is still watching the video at this point, there is still a lot of people who I'm noticing are either not watching the videos and just looking at the max roll guides and complaining about not hitting high regen values. The main thing I've noted, one person actually shared their profile and straight away they only had a frost bolt level of I think 18 or 19 because they hadn't actually got the plus levels on their items. there's a lot of factors involved, but I'll just quickly sum them up. You want as many levels as possible because that increases your cost of your spells. You want as high cast speed as possible because you can cast them quicker to expend as much life as possible, to trigger Tedcrods as much as possible, or even the case of recoup, to self-damage yourself as quick as possible. And most importantly, simply the play style. You need to ramp up your regen. You can see even when I start, I've only got 3,000-4,000. If I'm just walking around and casting spells just when I run into mobs, you know, if I go into a bit more of a open area here, if this is my play style, go to a mob, cast spells, go to a mob, cast spells. Even with this top end gear, I'm gonna struggle to keep any sort of regen up. What you'll see in all my demonstrations, and I've mentioned this in a few videos in terms of gameplay tips, you want to hold down your Frostbolt and your Spellslinger, or whatever spells you're running, the combination of your Spellslinger and your self-cast, you want to be holding those down always as you move. And if you do need to move and you want to move quicker, all you do is you dash, keep casting, dash, cast a bit, dash, cast a bit, to always maintain that. You can see now, previously the value was staying at around 3,000 to 4,000. Now it's up to 15,000, 16,000. You know, quite a substantial difference, but it is a play style that you need to be aware of. If this is not something that you like, if it frustrates you that you've got to sit there casting things, that you can't spend time carefully picking up your loot and checking it out, the slowdown in movement as a result, or the clunkiness of having to kind of dodge cast, if you don't like that, then the unfortunate reality is these type of builds just aren't for you. You're better off going and building something else, because it's just a requirement. You need to maintain your regen by constantly triggering your recoup or your regen from tech rods by constantly casting. I'll probably even create a completely dedicated video FAQ style with, I don't know, a PowerPoint really detailing specifically why this works the way it is. But I'll just wanted to tack that on to the end of the video in case anyone else is still watching at this point. Anyway, thank you again. I think it's the third time I'm saying it. I will actually wrap up the video this time. And all the best. Please leave comments. As always, I'll try and answer them as quick as possible. Thank you all.